The poet Emily Dickinson wrote, "If I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold no fire can ever warm me, I know that it is poetry. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that it's poetry." From Dylan Thomas, poetry is what's in a poem that makes you laugh, cry, pickle, be silent, makes your toenails twinkle, makes you want to do this or that or nothing, makes you know that you're alone in the unknown world, that your bliss and suffering is forever shared and forever all your own. And from William Hazlitt, poetry is all that is worth remembering in life. But I say, poetry is the music your heart creates and your mind puts into words. And in just a moment, we'll meet two people who are doing just that. Welcome to The Right Stuff. I'm Veronique Mandel. Let's meet our poetry writing guests, Vanessa Shields and Peter Rastovic. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, excellent. Vanessa, why poetry?
Well, it's kind of what I hear. The voices in my head tend to exist in stanzas or single lines. And once I started paying attention to that and started writing it down, it was just natural. So it's always happening. There's lots of voices in my head, but that's one of the more dominant ones.
They're the good voices.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah.
How did you come to poetry?
Well, my father was a poet in the Croatian language, so there was always literature, around the house. And I used to always be the kind of kid that would just take snippets of this and that, like photographs in my mind, and just observe things. And I just used poetry as a vehicle to make those observations.
Do you both remember the first poems you ever wrote? Or when you wrote them?
Well, I started writing in a journal at a very young age, and I'm sure that there were silly rhyming poems in there among all the other, I woke up today and went to school. I had a fun day, and I'm sure there was stuff in there. But yeah, I've been writing in a journal since I learned how to write, and so that's kind of how my voice started to cultivate. And love poetry for sure. I wrote a lot of poetry in high school. I think that's really where I started to hone my craft.
Did you grow up with your mother reciting poetry or reading poetry? Peter?
Well, my parents used to always read to us when we were kids. My late sister was older than I was, but so I kind of grew up ostensibly as an only child, so there was always stories, both in the Croatian language as well as the English language. Not so much poetry, but there was always an emphasis on literature and always great movies and great music. My mother loved opera. Opera is very poetic as well too.
Yes.
So she would play opera almost constantly, to the point that it kind of, I kind of, put my hand to my ears and said, it wasn't for me. I miss it now, though. Whenever time I hear opera, I think of my mother because she just loved it. She sang like a bird. That was her nickname.
Wow.
Yeah.
For me, no. We read a lot. We went to the library a lot. It was just my sister and I and my mom. And, we didn't have a lot, so we used our imagination all the time. And I mean, if I think about where anything kind of close to poetry lived for me when I was a child, it would be in music. We always had the radio on, so it was, top 40. But, when I hear, Greatest Love of All by Whitney Houston or, What's Love Got to Do with It by Tina Turner, I mean, those are essentially, poems put to words. And
yes.
That's what I grew up on. And so could be the rhythm from the music that really played into my writing style. But we didn't sit down and read poetry. We didn't really do anything like that. So, yeah.
Where do you get your inspiration?
Well, you're talking about as a child. I used to read liner notes for album covers.
Oh, that's cool.
And of course, I think it was Leonard Cohen said that the poets of today are amplified. So all my rock and roll heroes, some of them were really great songwriters. and I was inspired by their lyrics and things like that too. So, but as far as that goes, in terms of other inspirations, reading other poets, reading other books, you always get snippets of ideas in terms of how to to phrase things, or how to capture certain elements in terms of your writing style. Everybody's writing style is unique. We're two poets in a pool of tons of poets, and we'd all look at the same glass of water on table and look at it differently and react to it differently. But the idea is the inspirations come from everything that we have in our own life that touches our heart and our soul to give us the credence to do what we want to do.
What about you, Vanessa? I know we're going to talk about your books, both of you, very shortly, but sort of who inspires you?
The people in my life inspire me, like alive people. The women in my life inspire me, of all ages. Teachers have inspired me throughout my whole life. And so I really write from a lived experience. So I always feel like I've done everything backwards in terms of my poetic and literary education. I didn't read Anne of Green Gables until I was 27. And then I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't read this my whole life. And so again, because I have written in a journal for so long, my voice really comes through my experience and my reactions and responses to life and the people in my life, and the things in my life and the animals in my life and the nature in my life. So I'm never not inspired. I've never had that as a challenge in my writing life at all. Maybe for some essays in university, but when it comes to poetry, I'm over inspired. Like I can write anytime. So.
And you never know where that inspiration is going to come from, or where you're going to find wonderful poetry. In reading The Lord of the Rings, my favorite parts when I first started reading it were all sort of the wonderful poetry that in The Lord of the Rings. So, do you think that there was for a while, poets, and nobody wanted to publish poetry, or it didn't seem to be getting the justice that it deserves. Do you think poetry is making a comeback?
Oh yeah, I had the pleasure of starting university in the mid-'70s. It was kind of like the renaissance of Canadian literature. There were so many good things happening, so many great poets. But it's continued on. Like we haven't really lost it. It's always been there in the background. And fundamentally inspiring even novelists and short story writers in terms of the poetry they've read. So poetry's never really gone out of style. We listen to it in our music. Look at rap. Look at hip hop. It's poetry. It's beautiful poetry. It's gorgeous poetry. So I think poetry has always had it's been a constant in all of our lives. It's just that we have to take the time to slow things down a bit and really enjoy it, and like fine wine.
Because you're right. I think what it probably sort of boils down to is that people don't call it poetry.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I think too that our expression of it has shifted. I mean, in the 70s and the 60s, there was so much. Everyone had so much to say. With all kinds of things that were going on across the world, and people were listening, and the poets really held up a strong voice for that. From war to racial tensions, all of that stuff.
And a lot of that in music.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
But those things haven't gone away, but how we talk about them and how we deal with them and how artists express their reactions to that has shifted. But I think now it's shifting back. I mean, the internet has connected us all. People, slam poetry is just huge right now. Everybody feels comfortable now getting up and speaking, and poetry is a really huge vessel that people are getting back to, at least in my generation and my experience right now.
Spoken word with movement as well too, and dance. It's huge. The overlays and the interconnection of the various art forms. This is a good age because we're starting to experience things that we never did before. So the spoken word really becomes three-dimensional when it's used in other art forms. It's amazing.
And even in journalism, now everything is done across multiple platforms.
Right. Yeah.
So you take a written word and then you have to speak it on radio, and you have to take all those same words and rejumble them and present them on television, and then you have to rejumble them again and present them online. So it seems through all of the art forms, you're right, that there is that.
We're
that
reinventing
shift.
the word. You know,
Yes.
Poetry. People say, "Oh, I don't like poetry" or whatever.
Yeah.
Poetry in itself, well, you know, call it phraseology. You know, call it just writing. You know, call it spoken word. Call it all these things. As you say, slam. There's all kinds of vernacular. It's about communication. It's getting the message. You know, the message is the medium, and vice versa. Right? That's what it's all about.
I'm not sure when it stopped being cool, but I mean, you know, in the 20s and 30s, in Hemingway's time, you know, if you were a poet, everyone was like, oh, call the poets, call the artists.
Yes,
I'm not
yes.
sure when it kind of went.
And the beatnik era.
Well, you know, the cool
What year?
black
What decade were the
turtlenecks and
1950s, Phil and Getty and those people. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
We're just talking about City Lights Bookstore
yeah.
in Frisco. You can go there and see photographs of all those great poets up and down the stairwell. It's amazing, original photographs. You know, along with
Wow.
the guys from the Grateful Dead and Bob Dylan and the Stones and so on. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think, you know, we got a little bit distracted with technology, and now that we're using it to share more and communicate more and connect more, you know, poets and artists and everybody, like I said, it's shifting. There's a shift that's happening again. And so, you know, I mean, identity is a huge thing as a writer, and it took me a while to say I'm a writer, and it took me even longer to say I'm a poet. But now I'm okay to say I'm a poet.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
When did you get your first work published? Either.
Well, I was published very early on, first of all, in high school and university, and very small magazines. But I didn't get my first book published till about 4 years ago. Marty Gervais, who's a good friend and our poet laureate, you know, for the city of Windsor, has been bugging me for years. He saw, you know, the small magazines, so he said, we got to get a book out. So my first book, In Lieu of Flowers, came out through Marty Gervais. And just recently, last year, my book Sidelines came out through Marty Gervais' publishing class. So thanks to him, he prodded me, pushed me, and it's really exciting to have a book. It's so different from what I do as a lawyer on a day-to-day basis in my you know, my business life. People say, you're a poet? And I said, yeah, why not? You know, I mean, life's a banquet, right? Life's a banquet. There's so many things to feed off of. So, and I use that as an example, or you know, as fodder for my poetry in terms of the stories that I hear and see. I don't tell any secrets here, but observations in terms of people in my day-to-day life.
Do people ever recognize themselves?
In my work, I can't say anyone has really said that to me, but I've done some dedications, you know, especially some poets that have been good friends as well too, that are referred to in my book. Yeah.
Oh, I like give names and details and
You let it all hang out.
it's all, they know who they are. And,
Well, we have so much more to talk about, and I promise I'm going to have them read from their books, and we'll do all that, but we have to take a short break.